It's like we've done this before, Paul.
We have, and it's always fun. So, Dr. Knudsen, lots of people, myself included, have been looking forward to hearing where you're going to land next. And the winner is, ta-da!
Pisces, Parker Institute for Cancer Immunology.
Oh, fantastic.
Immunotherapeutics, sorry. It's been a long day already. I am the CEO.
Okay, fantastic. What maybe we should just begin with just talking through why you decided to take this place.
Yeah.
Job.
Well, I think if you really think about the arc of what it is that I do, it's pretty clear what drives me is getting innovation to people. That's what drove me to be a scientist and to bend towards translational work that change practice. It's what drove me to run a major cancer center, the science, but also the cancer care, in Jefferson Health to get those innovations to people. And I think it was there that I first realized the deep divide between the level of innovation that's happening on the scientific front and the ability to get those innovations into clinical testing and into the marketplace where people can actually get access to new interventions for detection, prevention, and cure. So, this had a lot to do with why I accepted the call from the American Cancer Society, 4+ years ago, when they really wanted someone to come in and think differently about the role of the American Cancer Society in solving for the cancer problem. And we did bake some innovative concepts in there, everything from funding cancer care at home strategies or research side to using technology on the patient support side to Bright Edge of truly investing in early stage companies whose product or service aligned to the ACS mission of having an ability to improve lives. And that latter example really energized me and illuminated for me more strongly than ever how much more is needed in that space to actually take the terrific discoveries that are happening and get them off of the lab floor and into the hands or others of people. So along comes the Parker Institute for Cancer Immunotherapy, and Pisces has this truly unique model that is about, first of all, wants to take big, bold bets. And they've had 10 years of runway of showing how successful this is, of not just funding science by connecting exceptional researchers and fostering actively the collaborations amongst them for the purpose of accelerating cures, but then curating the IP, curating the technology, and spinning off new companies. So there are two ways you could describe it. It's either, bench to bedside to marketplace, or it's bench to business. And, those are the things that I think are going to be really critical if we're going to dynamically change the way that we accelerate progress against cancer. That would have energized me at the best of times. And so I'm very excited to take the helm and put together the next 10 years or next, of course, big vision, but then also the shorter term, what are we going to achieve through this model of bench to business? But I think the events right now let us in the country with headwinds facing science make Pisces more critical than ever. Headwinds to cancer funding and the criticality of ensuring that that discovery engine keeps going, but also the lack of access to capital to get early stage companies off the ground and into clinical testing so that patients benefit.
Well, actually, thinking of bench to business, the bench is at the NCI designated cancer centers, among other places, and places that just have always been funded by the government. Is that going away? Can you fill in for this disaster, for the lack of a better word?
I don't think there is any way that we can replace the US government, nor should we. The ethos of, but we can help. We can significantly help the problem by being exquisitely focused on high risk, high gain science. When funding lines shrink, often it's the high risk, like really dynamically fundamental science that could change lives is what doesn't get funded because it is inherently, more risky and truly something that's beyond the incremental. That's the ethos of what it is that Pisces funds through these networks, but it's not funding Dr. Goldberg, funding Dr. Knudsen. It's funding a constellation of investigators to work together, where it's expected that there's data share, where it's expected that there's idea share, so that you find the best and brightest that individually may have wonderful ideas, but then also create the synergy from the collaborative nature of the Pisces network. That I think is going to help us find a way to ensure that really truly cutting edge science gets funded. But it's got to be more than that. How many wonderful discoveries end at Cell Science and Nature? We've got to get beyond that and into ensuring that they have the capital to get into clinical testing.
But the bench again is at the cancer centers or other research organizations, typically funded by the US government.
Well, and clinical trials. That clinical testing is
Yeah.
funded by the US government. Last I checked, in most years, the NIH or NCI budget for clinical trials is about 12% of their budget. So that's an immediate impact on cancer patients if the resources that are required to conduct clinical research start to deteriorate. And then the indirect cost cuts have a potential to also put clinical testing and clinical trials under threat, which we know is the most advanced form of care for cancer patients. So I'm really very, very hopeful that that there will be a true understanding about the importance of sustaining cancer science and escalating cancer science in the U.S. Um, just a couple of hours ago, and I wrote an op-ed with 9 other cancer leaders in the U.S. that was just published that gives the administration some shovel-ready strategies that they can take to ensure that we continue to make progress against cancer. The funding, though, is the root of it all, right? The funding is the root of the discoveries that do make a difference. And we can draw a direct line between the NIH funding and NCI funding of fundamental science and then the significant gains that we've made in cancer. Something I feel that we as an oncology community can do a potentially better job communicating to the US public is that return on investment of cancer science, including but not limited to the 34% reduction in cancer mortality that we've seen since 1991 that came as a result of this doubling down in the investment in cancer science in the US.
So I guess the question would be, maybe we should just look at cancer centers and then maybe separately the clinical trials groups. Without that, you have very little, even as the Parker Institute to work with. If you decimate that, what can possibly take place of these two things?
I don't think that there's any one organization that is poised to replace government funding. I can't imagine how that would happen. If there was a way, trust me, I would be, advocating for it. But where I do think that each organization can make a difference is by identifying what is their unique ability to affect change within the confines of what they do as an organization. And for us, it is focusing on therapies that are potentially curative and specifically for difficult to treat cancers. And there's so much that's been achieved through with the onset of immunotherapy. I'm old enough to remember the days before immunotherapy, to see it play out as a cancer center director and head of oncology. And then now to see the incredible science that's coming, for example, with mRNA vaccines and the ability of these new therapeutic strategies to prevent recurrence. ASCO GU right here in San Francisco, just a few weeks ago, we saw unbelievable results that came from mRNA vaccine technology that would allow us to scale immunotherapy that's specific to your tumor and to reach more patients because of the scalability. So just some of the things that we'll be really interested in.
Well, mRNA vaccines and immunotherapy both could really be threatened by some of the thinking that's now taking place in Washington.
It sure is. And so you've just underscored some of the other reasons why of the things that I could have done. This is what really rose to the top. But I also very much so I believe in the bold nature of this organization of being absolutely willing to place big bets behind potential curative breakthroughs and ride the bumps because they're not all going to hit pay dirt.
Mhm.
But someone's got to take on that high risk. And generally, when the funding lines shrink, it's the safer science that gets funded. So we're providing a mechanism for funding of that new research that's coming. But I also can't emphasize this enough. That's 1/3 of what we do, right? The rest of it is curating that IP, determining what should move over into clinical testing, supporting that, and then and then developing or contributing to portfolio companies. It's both. There's some where we're the lead investor. There are some where we're part of a syndicate. There are some where we're board advisors and, because we've invested less, but have a very strong hand in guiding what the science looks like. So it's in that way that I feel really strongly about our ability to affect change. The other, I'd say, differentiator that is quite unique to Pisces is we see that science from the very beginning, right? From the nascent observation of something that could be game changing that we've funded, made possible by the not just funding the individual, but funding the collaborations, shepherding that all the way through publication and then through the strategy of how we actually move it forward into the private sector.
Fascinating. What about the maybe the numbers would help to understand this. Uh, what is how what are the gross receipts? First of all, what is the structure? The structure is not like you don't file 990s. You're a private organization, right?
No, 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 it's a 501(c)(3). They do file 990s and audited financials. And the way that the organization is structured, but you're only seeing part of it, right? You're only seeing the kind of the dollars that come in really to fund the grants and other subsets. But then as we go over into the commercialization space, it's different. So it's probably easier to look at it by impact. So there, more than 1,000 investigators have been funded by Pisces in the last 10 years. And there are 17 companies in the portfolio. And that portfolio has raised more than $4 billion. It's not
Wow.
small.
Mhm.
But the
Wow.
infrastructure is lean, right? Because we don't need to have a large infrastructure, nor would I advocate for us to build one in order to do what it is that we do.
So these are enormous numbers.
Yeah, $4 billion raised is pretty spectacular for a portfolio of that size. So, considering that they're early stage companies. And when I first became familiar with what it is that has been happening on the portfolio side, that's an indication that those $4 billion didn't all come from Pisces, but there were Pisces funded ideas, Pisces curated ideas. Sometimes Pisces was the lead investor, sometimes not. But what that means is others are coming along with us, right? And this is where venture capital is recognizing the value of Pisces, of the ability to pick out the science because we didn't just learn about it because someone pitched us. We knew about it because it started with a funded investigator. That's
Well,
what makes it so different. It's actually a mind-blowing distinction compared to how most cancer science funding goes. It's not you're not leaving the investigator, if you will, at the funding site. You're going and helping them all the way through to become a founder or to, in some cases, become a CEO of those companies and really get it to recognize its potential.
So the most of that money really comes in. It's gross receipts is the part you filed at 990, And then on the money raised on the capital side, it's not publicly reported. No, I'm certainly not saying it should be, but it is. So my
No,
goodness.
no.
Right.
And but I do think an important component of this is what happens when there is value realized on the portfolio side. Those dollars, and this is Sean Parker's commitment, come back into Pisces. But the reason for the portfolio companies is not it's not to just build some return. That's, if we wanted to do that, there would be very different ways to do that. But in this case, the return is impact on people, right? Because we exist because of cancer patients, and we exist because despite decades of scientific progress, cancer mortality rates are still too high. And thus our focus on the difficult to treat tumors, thus our focus on cutting edge therapeutics, and thus the investment all the way through into clinical testing. And when the impact on patients starts with the first time that someone's able to gain access to those new therapeutics through clinical trial. And ultimately, in when there's an exit, acquisition, license, or what have you, that anything realized on the portfolio side comes back into Pisces. So
Mhm.
they can fund more research. That's the ecosystem.
But you tried to build Bright Edge at ACS, and did it have, maybe I should rephrase the question so we're not talking about the American Cancer Society, but what does it require to do this kind of a thing in the context of a 501(c)(3) organization? Like,
Yeah, there are very straightforward ways to do it, and there are some parallels with ACS's Bright Edge. ACS was, because ACS has so many different parts to what that phenomenal organization does, and I'm so proud of my former team at ACS and what we were able to achieve in the last 4 years. It's just a completely different organization than it was 4.5 years ago, and I'm exceptionally proud of it. I'm exceptionally proud of Bright Edge. That was one of our innovation plays that I think was quite unique at the time, um, where we would make investments in early stage companies. Now, ACS couldn't make very large investments because we had so much of a mission that we needed to do, including but not limited to the patient support activities,
mhm.
in the community. So that was a huge effort. So it was certainly not, I would say, it wasn't a pillar of what it is that we were doing, but it was an important innovation strategy that we lifted up and breathed new life into. Just brilliant, brilliant leadership from Alice Pomponio at ACS. And she shared a similar type of vision of let's get innovation to people. I think she and I were very like-minded that way and inspire others to come along. And so ACS could never, we would have never been able to use donor dollars, in that organization to be a lead investor or even part of a syndicate that was formidable, right? But what we did was really meaningful and very helpful. And I think we also helped those companies by lending our expertise to give them feedback as these early stage companies grew up. The same is true of Pisces. All of that is true and more, right? Because we can be the lead investor. We can, make a significant contribution and then stay with that organization, stay with the company by presence on the board and continuing to help shape, guide, and advise as we should, right? So, so that's really, it's really at a much different scale. But still the intent is the same. Get innovation to people faster and access to cures and help and curate along the way.
Well, CPRED does something similar, and I guess the Mark Foundation too, right?
I think there's some similarities, but kind of distinctions at the level of the level of the ability to generate, to like truly generate new companies. So some of the new codes that have been developed out of Pisces were developed because of the network of truly Pisces actively, not just receiving a pitch from someone to say, hey, I'd like to start this company because I have a great idea. but rather taking a very different active role. One of the ones that's really interesting, Arsenal, as I understand it, happened actually at one of the Pisces retreats of a very active curation of investigators pulling together people who individually had phenomenal ideas and observations that when put together as a whole could be a total game changer as a therapeutic. And then those discussions went on. The concept was pressure tested, the founders identified, the company formed, the capital found, which is very hard to do in the early stage life sciences space, especially in therapeutics. And then it went. And so, and it's in clinical testing now. It really went all the way the arc from, investigators funded by Pisces, identified by Pisces, the company developed and helped by Pisces throughout.
Well, it's also, I guess I was thinking also Prostate Cancer Foundation is another one of the places that does that, right? That's your.
I have love in my heart that's deep for Mike Milken and for the Prostate Cancer Foundation. I will always consider myself part of that community. But there's so many wonderful things that I think I take home as a CEO that I learned from PCF. And one is ensuring that your investigators are not acting in a silo and pulling them together in a way that you're taking a very active role in making suggestions and guiding and advising. I remember as part of my time at PCF of having Howard Sewell come from PCF into my office to talk about how we were doing with some of the grants some of the studies that PCF had been funding, and saying to me, "Oh, Karen, like I love this observation, and you should talk to Johan de Bono in the UK, and you should talk to Mark Rubin who was then at Cornell. And I think that the three of you guys, and then Felix Feng at UCSF, whom I loved, could really do something incredible together under the umbrella of DNA repair. They were dot connectors, helping us find each other and then being the wind at our back when we needed to talk to pharma, and the wind at our back when we needed someone to help us lift up a clinical trial, which we did. So these are learnings for me about what can happen with influence. Influence is part of Pisces, but investment is also part of Pisces.
So this has kind of been a part of what you've been doing for a very, very long time.
I think so. I mean, to me, it's a completely natural arc of, taking that goal of accelerating progress through innovation as a scientist, the healthcare executive, and the healthcare executive, you see all the problems, all the barriers that exist, and you start to dream, what if there were a different reality? And what if there was a different way for my scientists to get their great ideas into that clinical phase? And as a healthcare executive, what if there was a better way to get wonderful trials up and running faster? And that's what Pisces is all about. So
Mm.
for me, it was an absolutely natural arc. I loved my very first conversation, um, with Sean Parker and team started, months ago at the end of last year, as soon as I announced I was going to leave ACS. And it's just been an incredible journey, since then. So I left ACS March 3rd and joined Pisces March 31st. It wasn't much of a break, but at least it was a small one.
That's really fantastic. But do you see yourself working with other organizations, other foundations, or do you work just kind of on your own?
I think my DNA is definitely geared toward what do we need to do alone because we have to, and what are the things that we'd be better off partnering on. I think we are one cancer ecosystem, and in fact, today I had the first executive team meeting with my team here in San Francisco, and was one of the major topics on the table of what are the things that's unique to Pisces that we're uniquely poised to do, and what are the things that we really can do much better, faster through partnership. I think I have a good reputation for that in the oncology world. And so I know it's baked into the DNA of this organization. And it's certainly something that I hear from Sean, who is just an incredible person. I mean, motivated by all the right things, a brilliant mind, and did a great job leading this organization and setting the stage for me to come in as CEO.
Oh, that's fascinating. But what is it went through a certain number of iterations as an organization, since it's not been much of it hasn't been something we really covered because it just didn't really come up. But what are the stages? What is his kind of the learning curve? How do you get from starting a foundation to hiring Karen Knudsen?
Mm. Well, I don't have all the insights since I wasn't here for it, but I'll tell you what I think I know, and people will have to forgive me if I get some of the history wrong. But this is really Sean's brainchild. He really saw an opportunity to get behind a novel technology, immunotherapy, at a time when there wasn't a lot of faith in it. And thinking through as a business person would, let's not just fund the science. Let's take it all the way through to testing. But that's a big, big, bold choice because by definition that a certain number of them are going to fail at clinical testing. And so you have to be willing from the outset to accept the fact that you may make all the right decisions, but you just don't know until you get into clinical testing whether or not something is going to work. So kudos to him for saying we're going to do this all the way or we're not going to do it at all. Pisces was born. They had an incredible run of putting together that vision, and it was, quite successful. The previous CEO left to start his own company, so that happens. And but is still tightly aligned to Pisces. So then Sean stepped back into the role of, of course, being the founder and the chair of the board, but also to running the organization. And saw it through a whole series of different changes that had happened. There was a period of time when Pisces had decided to try to fund clinical trials themselves. And there was a period of time that it was like anything in business. It was an experimental program. That program had some incredible benefit. We're actually talking today about the samples that were generated from those clinical trials, which are realizing incredible value for collaboration right now and co-development of diagnostics for example, identifying markers in the serum of patients who would go on later to have adverse events or who were exceptional responders. So there's a whole body of materials that were developed during that period of time where they pressure tested, like, should we be funding clinical trials? And they went to a period of which they did, but at the end of the day, the success of enrolling in a clinical trial didn't live with Pisces, right? It lived with the organizations that were running those studies. It's something that pharma faces all the time too. So for reasons that are not known to me, that I don't question, there was an idea, so, okay, we did that. Now let's close that and move on because more things were moving into the space where they could be developed into nucos. So, you can't do everything all the time. And so the model of today really thrived under the last several years, and those portfolio companies were born. It's a perfect time for Karen Knudsen to come in.
Oh, it's fascinating because you know the entire sort of scope of how it works. But I guess there was a period where there was intramural research done within Parker.
So that's the clinical research, in fact. And but still today, we are publishing, including, senior author major publications from within Pisces, lean though we may be, right? That is leveraging some of those data, and still some of the clinical trials are still being published that were sponsored by Pisces. So, but you can't, if that's a very, very significant investment that's required to run clinical trials, as you know. So
But
there's
those,
all opportunity costs and strategic choices, strategic priorities that have to go on. And when the priority, I agree with where we are right now, of and now that things are mature enough in the 10-year experiment, that more things have gone into that portfolio side, important for us to focus there.
I guess you don't need to reinvent N Corps or cooperative groups. What,
No,
yeah, I mean, they just need to fund them and not forget to fund them. What about community oncology groups? Is that something that you ever work with or?
absolutely. In fact, some of the clinical trials that were run out in the community. I was just meeting with the team today, the biostatistician who oversaw, the data assessment from those and learned where those samples were coming from and where those trials were conducted. So, not all of that's published, so I won't say more about it, but
Yeah,
the
but
community, I think, look, it's important for me to go to an organization where I agree with the business strategy overall and feel that I've got something to contribute to grow it and really take this phenomenal organization to the next level. That's a gating factor. But it's also for me got to align to my core values. And this, I think this really shone through at ACS of taking, transforming ACS to really focus on cancer patients and families and align our activities and missions to what ACS was uniquely poised to do. With Pisces, it's the same. And, certainly for me, all the discussions with Sean were just incredible of his commitment to not only making sure that breakthroughs get fast tracked, right? But that there's more access to those breakthroughs, and certainly thinking through technologies that could help us scale immunotherapy out into the community. That's in scope at Pisces, which I think is really important.
did Sean just pick up the phone and call you out of the blue?
No, there was an intermediary that called me and said, "Is this something you'd ever think about?" And I knew, of course, of Pisces because of having met some of the group at Bright Edge. And also, watching the incredible science that was funded. So when I got a chance to learn more about where the organization was, where it saw itself as going, and why they were looking for a CEO, I have to say I was intrigued. And then the first meeting with Sean, which was by Zoom before we actually got to meet in person, it was just impossible not to get swept up into the enthusiasm that he has and the deep passion and, frankly, the deep content knowledge of what needs to happen in order to develop immunotherapy that's going to reach more people and cure more patients. He
Mhm.
really, really deeply understands the material. And he also understands from a business perspective, of course, what needs to happen. And he fully then understands the big bets that he'd like to take. I mean, this is different, right? His name's in this organization and will always be part of this organization, even though we will continue to expand and grow the scope and scale of what we do. He's incredible. I found it impossible to say no.
Well, some 501(c)(3)s have the CEO on the board, while others have a CEO who's not on the board. You've tried at ACS, you were not on the board. Are you on the board here?
Absolutely.
That was a requirement.
I don't think that they would have had it any other way. Speaking as a board member myself, right? I'm on the board of two early stage companies. One's a diagnostic, the other is the patient services. I'm a board observer for two. And of course, I'm on the board of Research America. But I'll be going onto the board of a large cap company next month, assuming nothing changes at the investor meeting. But it's good governance is really, really important, across the board. It's a good business principle. Here, I think there's no question that on the Pisces CEO serves on the board. The previous Pisces CEO served on the board, of course, and as a voting member.
What's the advantage of that, just out of curiosity?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of governance principles that are written about this, but the board, of course, hires and fires the CEO. That's one of their roles in addition to the fiduciary responsibility, and the CEO is charged with operating. But when the CEO is a voting member of the board, then of any organization, you can look at any for-profit organization, that's how they're structured, because it's important for the CEO to be in the room when discussions are had outside things that CEO shouldn't be in the room for, things like their performance evaluation, things like their compensation discussion. There are plenty of times when the CEO shouldn't be in the room. But in general, the board's role is to develop strategy so that in concert with the CEO, so that it can be executed. And the CEO is charged with executing that strategy. So there's a certain amount of transparency and communication that happens when the CEO is on the board. And of course, then they have a vote on what happens moving forward.
Well, plus, what's the point of hiring someone like Karen Knudsen and not letting her lead? That's kind of silly.
I hope I wouldn't take a role where I wasn't allowed to lead. But for me, I've been so blessed in my life in every possible way, personally and professionally. And when I announced that I was going to leave ACS, and I love that organization. I'm so proud of the team that we built and what we did. But I had a lot that was put in front of me that I could do. Most of it in the for-profit world. And I actually thought that would be where I went. Really great opportunities and very thankful to have put them in front of me. But Pisces is something so incredibly special. I stopped being able to see myself doing anything else. So that was when I knew.
All right. So, will there be pillars? You set up the pillars system at the American Cancer Society. Are you going to have pillars here?
So I've officially been in this job for a little less than 35 hours. But we had the first discussion about strategy this morning with the executive team, who are also just, I mean, rock stars to a person, right? They're incredible people. And we talked about how it is that, what we want to achieve and how we will structure ourselves to get there. You may see pillars come. I think there's really good structure here now. And this is less of a wholesale change than just refining for speed of what it is that we can do. But I do envision, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I do envision this, certainly we will continue at the core of all of it is funding that early stage connected network of exceptional scientists to transform our thinking about cures, and then structuring the other two components, which I'll call them right now instead of pillars, for speed, a technology hub for the curation of the IP, and putting together the strategy for moving the science forward, and then the ultimate movement of the science forward in the venture side on the portfolio companies. So you can imagine in my mind how this is structured, starting to come in a pillars type model based on what we stand for, right? Accelerating cures for people.
What about the board memberships? That you will continue to be on the boards, and you're going on the board of a company that you're not, looking forward to hearing what that is.
Obviously my priorities are as a CEO to make sure that I'm doing everything humanly possible to achieve the Pisces mission and lead the team, which I will do. But the service on boards is something that he views as a net positive, as do I. I think most CEOs in the for-profit world serve on boards, and I will be one of those people.
Well, one probably last question is what about public policy advocacy? Are you going to engage in that? Because that is really necessary right now. It's not even a question, it's more of a request.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think you know how much I absolutely revere ACS Can and Lisa Lacasse and just the ability of that organization of which I was right because I was the CEO of ACS and ACS Can. And ACS Can is just incredibly effective. What they're able to do, I was so proud to be, to lead that team and learn from Lisa and her group. There is no 501(c)(4) here at Pisces at present.
Mhm.
Um, that doesn't mean that, we won't try to ensure that what's in scope for us, cancer funding, as well as cancer, ensuring that people have access to therapeutics, things like making sure that their drug approval processes are in place, et cetera, are incredibly important. So we'll press pause on that one for now. I don't have a great answer yet about what it will look like, but we won't be taking a back seat. And even if you just look at the comments that Sean made yesterday publicly when we were talking about my joining Pisces, he expressed a very strong desire to address the headwinds that are facing cancer science and that are facing the ability to get that science to people. So, it's something that the entirety of the cancer community will be focused on and determining what part each individual and each individual organization can play. Um, you know,
So
it'll be very hard for me to sit in the back seat of when there's a solution to be had. I'd like to think I'm the kind of person who will find a way to put that solution forward in a
mhm.
way that everyone can hear.
Yeah, yeah, it's actually really essential right now, it would seem, because for you, especially with based on what we were just talking about, because where is the bench science being done and where are clinical trials being done? And you can't do it without public money coming in. So I don't know, is there a way to do it otherwise?
I don't think so. So, there's no organization who's going to replace that. I don't think there's anyone in the US who wants us to fall behind as the worldwide leader in scientific discovery and conversion into new avenues to achieve health. I don't think anyone wants that. And in fact, there was a really terrific survey that Research America did very recently. This wasn't, 6 months ago. This was this year, asking individuals, red, blue, men, women, all ages, about their expectation as related to health policy and as related to funding medical innovation. And it wasn't just about cancer, of course, because Research America, as nor should it have been,
Mhm.
but the data were really, really encouraging because it showed that there was no divide in the US about the expectation, not just that there should be funding in medical innovation, but that should be a core component of what the US government funds. So I think there is widespread support. We've just got to get it to become a strategic priority.
Yeah. And what's also really interesting here is that under the National Cancer Act, the leader of the National Cancer Program is the NCI director. Right now, we're in a situation where there will be many leaders who are, I think, are directors of cancer centers, and I think you should be one of those people. And it just needs leadership, and it's going to get it, I hope.
I hope so too. And you know me, Paul. I will lean into a forward-thinking solution faster than anyone, whether I'm leading or following. Um, I believe very strongly that science is critical for health. It's critical for cancer cures. Uh, I think the science isn't enough. That's why I ended up at Pisces, and I'm so excited to be here. Um, but we're in this very uncertain time. That landscape can't be unsteady forever. And as it starts to settle out, then finding that new normal of what it is and how to identify strategies to make sure that science keeps going, especially cancer science. I'm committed to that as well.
Well, is there anything I forgot to ask?
Can't think of it. I'm not sure.
Okay.
It's been a dizzy array the last couple of days, as you can imagine, but a really terrific start.
That's great. Well, congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.